Well, good day, my friends. It's your old pal, Jordan the Lion. How are you all doing today? I hope you said great. Today we're coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee, and we're going to tell you about something very crazy that happened to Waylon Jennings in a house right off Music Row. Daze with Jordan the Lion and you all. It begins right now. All right, we've made it over to the section of Nashville that's called Music Row, the heart of Nashville's music business. Music Row began in 1955 when Owen Bradley opened the Quonset Hut, the first recording studio here. 1957, Chet Atkins opened RCA Studio at the corner of 17th and Hawkins. Other studios, publishing houses, and record labels including Columbia, Epic, Decca, Warner Brothers, Capitol, and Curb followed with offices. Street names were changed in 1975 to Music Square East and West. They have a statue over here in the park to Owen Bradley. It's him playing the piano. So Waylon Jennings had quite a drug problem throughout most of his life, and he would say that a lot of it came from feeling guilty initially. See, when he was a young man, Buddy Holly discovered him and decided he wanted to record and produce Waylon's first record. However, he asked Waylon to do him a favor. He said, "Waylon, I want to go out on tour for this winter dance party and I need a bass player. Can you play bass?" And Waylon said, "I don't know how to play bass." He said, "Don't worry, Waylon, it's the same as guitar, just bigger strings." So Waylon agreed to do it, and of course, 1959, when they went on that tour, as many people know, it was really bad weather conditions, and Buddy Holly decided to charter a plane for his band. Waylon Jennings was in that band, but the Big Bopper was also on the bill, and he was very sick and asked Waylon if he could take his place on the airplane. And so Waylon said, "Sure, that's fine with me." And when Buddy found out, he went to Waylon and said, "I heard you gave up your seat on the plane." He said, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, I hope your old bus freezes up on you." And Waylon said, "Well, I hope your plane crashes." And of course the plane did crash, and Waylon lived with that for a long time. He would end up coping with it by having a long span of doing amphetamine pills, and then graduated to cocaine, which he said was a shorter high. It was more expensive, but it was much smoother. And eventually the DEA ended up busting him at the house behind us. So at the time, this building was a recording studio. It was called American Sound, and it was run by Chip Moman, who Waylon was friends with because Chip had co-written a song called Lukenbach. And Waylon said he hated the song, but he knew it was a hit, and recorded the song. And so he would end up doing a lot of his recordings in the late 70s here. Now, he had an office that was actually right next door, was right here, because he had got his publishing back and it necessitated him having an office. So his personal office was in the upstairs of this building, and his son Terry told a really funny story, because he said, you know, back then during those days everybody did a lot of drugs, and he said one day he was actually walking from Waylon's office right here over to the studio. They're actually talking about Waylon Jennings right here on the tour bus. Terry said he was walking over to the recording studio, and he said as he was on the stretch in between, George Jones pulled up in a yellow convertible, and George popped open his trunk, and he said that he had a bunch of vials of Coke in the back and gave Terry one of them. And then Terry said, I looked at his license plate, and he had a cardboard license plate that said George. And I said, why do you have that? And he said, well, people keep stealing my vanity plates, so I just started doing it in cardboard. The police keep telling me I gotta replace it, but I'm getting tired of replacing it. Hilarious. So Waylon's office was actually on the top floor of this building, and it's kind of unique because if you go around to the side, they still have the Waylon Jennings logo on the side of the building. Now if you look up on the side of the building, you'll notice that it still has his logo right there. The Waylon Jennings Flying W. And this becomes really important in his drug bust because this address was 1117. They ran all of his business and everything out of here, and basically what happened was Waylon had decided, he found out that there was a little girl who was terminally ill and her dream was to go to Jamaica, and so he had arranged for that to happen and to pay for all that, and somebody that works for his manager messed it all up, and Waylon hit the roof and screamed at the guy. The guy felt so bad that he told Waylon he was sending him a present to make up for it. So he told Waylon he would have to pick it up at the Nashville airport. So they sent one of the receptionists along with one of her friends. They went and picked it up, and then instead of coming here back to the office, they actually went over to where Waylon was recording next door at American Sound, because he was recording some backing tracks for his good friend Hank Williams Jr. Hank was covering Storms Never Last by Jessie Coulter, which is Waylon Jennings' wife, and Waylon was singing backup on it. Now when the women came back with the package, they immediately gave it to Waylon. Waylon opened it up, and there was a package inside. When he opened that one up, there were a couple of bags of coke in there. So he just put that little package up on the music stand and put his headphones on to start recording, and his drummer Richie Albright was actually running the session, so he was behind the controls. And Waylon said when he was getting ready and thought he was going to hear the music, all of a sudden he heard a lot of people in the sound room, and what had happened was Richie had his hand down on the talkback button so that, you know, Waylon could hear everything that was going on, and the DEA had broken in and were saying that they were here to arrest Waylon Jennings. Now, Richie said, we're in the middle of a session, you can't just break in, do you have a warrant? And they said, yeah, we do. And all of a sudden, Waylon, hearing what was going on, pretended he couldn't and just shouted, all right, fire it up, let's record. And so Richie hit record, and Waylon recorded his part, and then when it stopped, all of a sudden Waylon came in and yelled, acted like he didn't see the guys, and said, play it back and crank it up. And he went back in the recording studio. So Richie starts doing that, and Richie comes in and acts like he's talking to Waylon, saying, hey, we need to re-record that, and he's pointing to the speakers and stuff. And he says, Waylon, do you know what's going on? Waylon said, hell yeah, I know what's going on, I heard him. He said, don't worry, Waylon, I'm going to take the fall on this one. He said, no, Richie, you're not going to. So Richie goes back in behind the controls. They record another take, and then the DEA busts in and says, hey, Waylon, we're here to arrest you, and we have a search warrant. We actually have 2 search warrants, and it was for possession of cocaine and for intent to distribute cocaine. And so Waylon said, well, this says possession of cocaine. I'm looking around, I don't see any. So good luck finding some around here, guys. Because while Waylon heard what was going on, he was actually out of view of the DEA agents, and he had picked up that envelope and thrown it behind him, and it went under a baseboard. So then he looks at the warrants, and he notices that the warrant is not for the recording studio. The warrant that was issued is actually for his business, his office over here. And so he says, well, boys, this address is not this building. You want the place over there. And they knew that the drugs were here because they had intercepted them. Basically what apparently had happened was somebody that was working for the courier got suspicious and alerted the DEA, and apparently the DEA was really cracking down, because this was August 24th of 1977, right after Elvis had died of having pills and things like that. So they're really cracking down on that kind of stuff. And so Waylon seemed to be in a lot of trouble. However, like he said, you don't have a warrant. So he told him, we got to do things by the book. So if you want to look around here, because this isn't my studio, you're going to have to get a warrant. And he tells him, but you cannot leave this room because the things in that recording studio There's millions of dollars worth of equipment and you have no business in there, and I don't want you messing anything up. So he ends up going back into the recording studio while the DEA agents are working on getting their new paperwork, and Richie comes in there, and as they're recording, Richie goes downstairs and he takes the outer envelope and hides it in a crawl space inside this studio. It had actually been down in the basement. Then he comes back up and he's trying to figure out what he's going to do with the bags of drugs that he's got, because he now has put them in his pockets. And Waylon ends up thinking up a great idea. All of a sudden, one of the guys that works for him from the office over here comes in, sees the DEA, and starts going crazy, yelling at the DEA and all this stuff. And Waylon uses that as a distraction. He goes in there and starts yelling at his employee and going, hey, just calm down, you know, we'll get through this. And as they're going back and forth, Richie Albright runs into the bathroom, dumps everything that they had down the toilet, flushes the toilet, and then the DEA hears the toilet flush and says, Waylon, what did you do with the stuff? And he said, if there was anything here, it ain't here anymore. So they did end up arresting Waylon because they found the baggies, but there was nothing in there. So they couldn't charge him for anything, because even though they found, you know, what could have been considered contraband, the empty bags, they didn't have a search warrant for this place to even do it. So Waylon was in this building for a long time. There's a rumor, I mean, the guys on the tour bus just said that up here on this balcony is where he wrote the Dukes of Hazzard theme. He used to hang out with Willie Nelson on the porch of this place. He did say that after this, he felt like he was being hunted by the government. Like everywhere he went, he said he didn't feel comfortable going home, so he would not go home. He would stay in hotels. And he said, and then when he would stay in hotels, they would have agents on rooms on either side of him. So he ended up doing drugs for a long time. Wasn't until Jessie Coulter got pregnant with Shooter Jennings that he started thinking about cleaning up, because they always talked about wanting to have kids, but they were kind of putting it off, waiting for him to get done with doing all the drugs and everything. And she kind of realized he just wasn't going to, so they just decided to get pregnant so she could be a mother. And that's exactly what they did. And he said one day he used to have a bunch of straws around the house. He would cut these straws and he would grind up his coke, put it in a medicine bottle, put that in a cigarette pack, and then he could just do a blast out of his front pocket throughout the day. Terry, his son, said one year, as like a joke, they stole an Arby's straw dispenser and gave it to Waylon as a gift. But Waylon said one of the things that made him stop was one day when he was a real little kid, he saw him pick up a straw and put it in his nose. And he was like, oh my God, I can't believe he saw me do that stuff. I didn't think he ever saw it. So he decided to end up giving it all up. But he was busted, arrested, even though they ended up dropping the charges on both his receptionist and Waylon. He said it cost him $100,000 to fight all of this. But again, they ended up having nothing. But he said they went the full 9 when they didn't have the search warrant. They're like, hey, you know, just tell us where it's at. We know it's been delivered here. You know, we don't want to arrest you. We're not going to put this in the paper or anything. And he's like, yeah, right. That's exactly why you're here. I know that. So he ended up eventually moving out of this building and selling the building. I would love to go in there and look around and see the bathroom and everything, but they have several signs that say no trespassing, so I'm sure with the tour buses they know exactly the story here and everything. But man, Terry said we were all paranoid after that. He said we would always, whenever we were recording here after that, he said they would always have someone looking out the window over here and somebody always looking out the front window just in case. Waylon himself said he basically did drugs with no regard for anything. He said he, you know, did it in public, openly, almost begging to be caught. So he said he couldn't believe that he never was, that like nothing ever happened. He said even though they almost got him this time, he said they could never prove it. And I know so many buildings get torn down and everything, so I'm so glad that Waylon's office is still here. And I love that that remnant is still up there. I hope it lasts forever. That is so cool. Definitely better thank his lucky stars that they didn't plan on the stuff being delivered over to the studio, because that was the only thing that saved him. Was they thought that it was going to be delivered back here to his office, and they ended up tracking it over here, which was not the address they had the search warrants for. And just to give you a full view all the way around, this would have been the back of Waylon's office, and then the entry into the studio. He used to record over at Hillbilly Central, which wasn't far away, but he and Tom Paul Glazer ended up having a big fight where Waylon accused him of basically stealing money from the royalties of one of their albums, and Tom Paul never got over the accusations and they never patched it up. So that's when he started recording over here with Hank Williams Jr. doing the cover of Storms Never Last. So if you go listen to that recording, he said that the take that he did was the keeper was right before they said, hey Waylon, like he had done the two recordings acting like he hadn't heard him. It was when they finally said, hey, we're here to arrest you and we have a warrant. And he said, well, I'm going to need to see that warrant then. And so the take before that was the final take. Well, my friends, we're going to call it a day from the old offices of Waylon Jennings and the old American Sound recording studio. Have a great night, everyone, and goodbye.